Welcome, everybody, to Wrestling and Everything, Coast to Coast, with your hosts, Evan Ginzburg and Buddy Sotello. Evan Ginzburg, will you please introduce your guest?
All right. I am sporting a Pro Wrestling Stories shirt, as you just saw. And my guest is my buddy and editor from Pro Wrestling Stories, one of the finest websites in the history of the wrestling business, without hype. I mean that sincerely, covering history with well-written, well-researched pieces. This is not about a bombardment of Raw and SmackDown reviews. This is something on a far higher level. From Pro Wrestling Stories, JP Zarka. How are you, JP?
Oh, I'm good. Cheers to that. I appreciate it. Is it too early in the day for you guys to have a drink?
Yeah. Not enough for, well, I've got my Action Diet Soda with me, but you're in London, right?
I'm in London. It's just after 9 p.m., so it's acceptable for me to have an alcoholic beverage while we're talking. But no, thank you for the introduction. I truly appreciate it, Evan. Evan, one of my dear friends, you've been writing for the site now for about 2 years, a bit more than that, and we met through a mutual friend, Mark Madison, who's with ProWrestlingPost.com, and very grateful to have met you. And yeah, guys, Buddy, thank you. You guys have a good show. I've been watching some of your episodes thus far, and what I like about it is that you get people on the show and you don't always just talk wrestling. You talk about life. You talk about what interests you, music, the arts, whatever, and that's what I'm all about.
That's why you call Wrestling and Everything.
Yeah. Well, and now we can call it Wrestling and Everything, Coast to Coast to Coast.
You took my joke. I was going to say that.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I just thought
I was going to propose a name change. I love it.
No, it's really great. And this is the first time that we've talked to someone. We've either talked to folks in California or in New York. How has life been with you in London with COVID-19?
Well, with the COVID-19, it's, we were in Australia when it started kicking off in March. And we were out there for some, friends of ours were getting married. And so about a weekend, we're starting to hear possibly things are going to get canceled. All the restaurants were closing down. We were on quarantine. Well, it wasn't an enforced quarantine, but we were with our friends for 2 weeks outside Melbourne, flew home early, and just seeing the airports just desolate, empty, that was a shocker. And of course, the numbers out here, a lot of people sick. Everybody knows somebody. My wife, her office had about 90% of them catch it. And luckily, because she was in Australia, she wasn't exposed to it. So we were kind of lucky in that regards, but, or I should say fortunate, really. But, we're in our home where we've got a back garden where my little one can play. And, if it's a bad day, we're inside. We're trying to keep my daughter occupied. That's the thing, if you've got little kids at home, you got to kind of keep them busy or they get bored. And
how old is your daughter?
She's 3.
Okay, I have 8-year-old twins, so yes, you'll probably see them running around in the background as even though I've told them that they need to stay still for 1 hour a week. It's not good enough.
8 years old.
They always manage it.
Pent-up energy. I used to teach as well, and so 8-year-olds, it's a good age. It's before they turn to the dark side.
Yeah. Well, sometimes my daughter has her moments, but anyway, so can you tell me some of the different now? In the United States, we're kind of getting used to the idea of wrestling being, a more of a spectatorless sport, so to speak. And I'm wondering, are there English promotions right now that are also going to the no audience type wrestling?
Honestly, that's a good question. I don't know. The shows I would go to out here, Revolution Pro, Progress Wrestling, they put on great stuff. I haven't been to a show now in about half a year. I'm not sure if I don't think they're doing shows at the moment. I might be wrong. I'm sure some of our listeners can correct that. But on the whole, sports has just stopped everywhere. I saw back, I think in America at the moment, soccer is back on TV. I don't know if there's people in the it can't be people in the audience, I imagine, but I saw a friend posting about that. But yeah, it just kind of seems everywhere in the world right now is at a standstill. What are your thoughts about the wrestling with no audience?
It's numbing. It's stultifying. It's basically unwatchable.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
was watching AEW show this week, and I thought it was better. I mean, it's like when you eat like oatmeal every single day. You start saying, you know what, I can eat this. It's not the greatest thing, but it's the AEW workers, I think, are used to working smaller shows, so they don't feel like they can perform for their friends still and have it not be this humiliating thing. Like when you get The Undertaker and he's wrestling in front of 5 or 6 people, well, The Undertaker hasn't, when he would walk into an airport, there'd be, 500 people that would jump around him. So, he knows.
Spectacle on and off camera.
Yeah, so when he's
6'10".
wrestling in front of just camera people and the wrestlers themselves, I think it's sort of, he doesn't know how to react. I think the WWE people have spent their time in front of such huge crowds, they've forgotten what it's like to like work a small show. And the AEW guys aren't that far away from doing indie stuff. So they, I mean, some of them are obviously, but some of them worked indie shows, not too long ago in their past. So working a smaller show and working for their friends is something they can still do and make it and put the energy into it, as opposed to saying like, why am I here wrestling in front of nobody? Which is kind of what I feel.
I'm gonna admit something here. I have a pro wrestling website, prowrestlingstories.com. I don't watch a lot of the current wrestling regularly. I'll watch it when I can. I'm a huge fan of the past. I love diving into the stories, and that stuff interests me. But nowadays, AEW, I watched the first 15 episodes or so, and then of course we went away for a while, and now it's just hard to get any time on the TV at the moment. But what I have seen with AEW is that they have the other members of the roster kind of spread out on the outside, making noise and reacting. I kind of like that. That makes it kind of draws you more in, and at least having some noise and some interaction beyond the barriers, it does make it more fun to watch. There's just those comedic interactions and such. Whereas I watched WrestleMania, and there were some matches where I think just the noises of the competitors grunting as they're hitting each other. It's like watching tennis without a crowd.
Yeah.
It kind of like you have to just kind of I turn the volume down and just watched. And if you're not listening to the fact there's no noise, I suppose it's okay. But they are going more with the cinematography now with the wrestling. They're not really doing, matches in the ring, 100% now. It's just all the pre-taped and splice it together, and it kind of gives it a different feel. And they're rolling with the tides right now, and it's working, I think, in that regards.
I don't want to watch 3 hours of anything that's, quote, I suppose it's okay. I want to really enjoy stuff.
But that's my mindset. Like, it's good. I haven't been too involved in a storyline since Daniel Bryan.
I said the same exact thing on one of these episodes.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks ago, I said there's nothing I've been emotionally involved with since Daniel Bryan. Yeah.
He sucked me back into wrestling. Like, I watched when I was little regularly. I had all the Coliseum video, the VHS tapes. We'd go to Blockbuster and we'd go straight to the wrestling section every Friday. Royal Rumbles were always my favorites, Survivor Series. And, then I stopped. There was like this dark period once I guess we got into high school and college, and then I probably stopped watching from 2002 to about 2013 when I just tuned in at SummerSlam 2013 just to see what was happening with WWE. And, Daniel Bryan's wrestling John Cena, beats him clean. I'm like, whoa, my goodness, I didn't expect this. I knew Daniel Bryan, who he was. I didn't expect him to win. And then, of course, Randy Orton comes out and Triple H screws him. And I'm like, damn it. I'm sucked in. You're rooting for the underdog. Now, I mean, I want to see someone like Cesaro, be getting the baton and run with it. Someone
yeah.
like him, someone different, somebody who's a workhorse who he entertains me. I know people behind the scenes, Vince doesn't find him that interesting. I think he's fantastic. If a Braun Strowman, yes, he's a giant, he's got the belt, doesn't interest me that much. Off camera, it just kind of seems like him and I wouldn't get along too well. He's shooting things in the backyard and things like this, to each their own, But, I want somebody who's a hard worker who you could get behind. And, they're not pushing that at the moment.
I love Cesaro. I used to see him in Ring of Honor at the Manhattan Center in back in, I'd say about 10 years ago, and the guy was tremendous. He never had a bad match. And WWE's kind of, except for his little tag team run with Sheamus, they basically have squandered his gifts. He's as good as anybody. As good as anybody.
Yeah.
So tell us about Pro Wrestling Stories and how Pro Wrestling Stories got started for you, and tell us all about it.
So I was on Reddit. So obviously 2013, I got real back into wrestling. I was reading a book by Cynthia Lennon on John Lennon from the Beatles. And I was just in this kick of reading biographies and autobiographies. And I picked up Bret Hart's book. And once I read those stories, things like, just craziness, the debauchery, the womanizing, the fights happening, everything like this really drew me in. And I thought to myself, my God, what's happening when those cameras aren't rolling? In a lot of cases is more interesting than what's happening on TV. And so I was I would be a frequent visitor to Reddit, Squared Circle. And there would be, once in a while, people would post a nostalgic, write-up or what have you, or here's some, rare old photos from backstage, not really seen, and I love that stuff. And so as I was diving back into watching wrestling again, I started doing write-ups from, things I had read, or I was really getting into shoot interviews on YouTube. And I would just splice together quotes that I'd listened to, and I'm like, this is a good story. So I put together a series every Saturday morning. I would wake up. My wife likes to sleep in on the weekends, well, before the little one was born, and I'd be up at 8 o'clock, and I would just start writing. And by noon, I'd have about 2,000 words story, and I would just post it on Reddit with the title Wrestling Stories. So it was a series every Saturday. I would put out a new wrestling story. And it got to a point where it got real popular. There was 30, 35 write-ups that I had done. It won in 2014. It was voted by the visitors to Squared Circle as the #1 series. And one day my wife just said to me, why don't you put these on a website? You're doing this every Saturday morning. You got enough here to at least get a site going with 30 plus articles. And I said, that's a good idea, just for me to do websites again. I'd done websites in the past with my music. I used to have a website from high school, and I would keep it up all the way through. And so, no, I could do this. And the day the website went live, which was actually 5 years ago today, so we so happened to be talking on the 5-year anniversary of my website.
Sheer coincidence, yeah.
It was sheer coincidence, correct. But I put the stories up, and the following day, Sports Illustrated, in like a little throwaway bit at the end of a piece, says, and pro wrestling fans, if you want to hear about, nostalgic stories and lose 30 minutes of your life, check out this website. And so right away, I had an influx of people coming to the page from the beginning, and there was an audience for it. Currently, I think we're all kind of like nostalgic beasts. We're always looking to the past and the way things were, and because they bring back a happy time in our lives, when things seemed a bit more innocent, and obviously times weren't innocent. Well, but it feels like that it just brings a good positive energy. And so when I started doing this, a lot of fans were just reading. Even the people who don't watch wrestling currently, they'll pick up a story about Razor Ramon, Scott Hall, it's something that he would do, beating up Marty Jannetty. We all know these names, even if you're not watching now. You're like, holy cow, I didn't know that happened. Or the Ultimate Warrior blowing off a Make-A-Wish family. A boy was on his last wish and wanted to meet his hero, and the Ultimate Warrior avoided him. And, you know,
Nice.
stories like this is
Nice.
just, you know,
Yeah.
that was the first story on my website, actually. So yeah, it's just things like this, or you could dive in and just, you know, there's endless stories, 600 plus articles to choose from. And it's obviously, it started slow. I would only do it on a Saturday in the beginning. And then it got to a point where I was able to leave teaching when it started picking up good readership. You know, we've had people like Bleacher Report was picking us up early days. Jim Ross was retweeting, and you know, wrestlers were reaching out to me for interviews and such. And that's when I knew, when not only the fans are, you know, appreciating the write-ups and diving into these stories that are lesser known, but the people that were living it enjoy it too. So that meant something, and it was really great.
So, who has been? Oh, so go ahead, Aaron.
What is the line between nostalgia and obsession? Because I had one Facebook admin who was like really like angry about something that happened in 1979 that other people on the page were disagreeing with him, and I'm like, man, maybe you should have like gotten over this in 40 years. You know, it's like, what's the line between, you know, enjoying the past and like just being trapped in it?
Well, the line is just, you have things you love. Just be a good person. You know, don't hold on to silly grudges. You know, online. You know, with the website, I've had an opportunity to reach thousands of people, and with the Facebook page particularly, hit 25,000 likes just this past week, and you can't get emotional off of somebody making a negative comment. You have to separate, you know, that comment from you as a person, and just don't take it to heart. That's what I try to do anyway.
Yeah, I'm talking, you know, this guy liked the wrestler from 1979 and the other guy didn't, and they like went at it tooth and nail, and I'm like, this stuff was 40 years ago.
Yeah. When passion's involved, you know, heightened energy comes out. You know, yeah, to each their own. But you know, if you're gonna have those moments of, you know, feeling all that passion building up, you just try to present it in a nice way. You know, so you don't want to put down other fans. Look, everyone's on these pages because they love wrestling. They love talking about wrestling. They love being reminded of things they may have forgotten about. And, you know, there's always going to be all walks of life in these pages. And the people who call them out, like we've talked in the past about how you've seen things in these groups and stuff, and I see them too. I tend to just hit mute on particular people. If I see someone causing lots of negativity, just boom, mute. Don't have to see that person, you know. And that's what it's all about. But really, I mean, for me to do that, I never, with the website, I never started it because it was ever an obsession. It was something I loved when I was little. It was something I loved when I was a teen. And I was so fascinated in these stories. And I never imagined that it would even grow to as big as it has. Like, so from 2015 till now, we've got, I think it was like 636 articles. Some of them are unpublished. I've had to unpublish some of the older ones. I have to do them up again. But 44 writers from all over the world, social media followers, you know, in the thousands. You know, we got 25 on the Facebook page. It shows people care, you know, and it means a lot to me. I'm just so happen to be the person putting them out there. But you know what really what I love is just seeing the people reading these stories and just saying, you know what, that reminded me of this when I was watching with my uncle, or I was watching this with my grandpa or my dad. They're no longer with me, and I'll get emails sometimes, and I'll pass it on to, you know, if it's about a particular piece one of my writers have written, I'll forward it to them and say, well done, you've just made this person's day with this story. And that's what it's about, making people smile. And learn about the past too.
So yeah, let's go back to your past. What was it that made you love wrestling to start with? What was it, the thing that?
The first experience I had in wrestling, and it sounds cliche, it was Hogan and Andre, WrestleMania 3. I was 4 years old when that happened, And my mom was a United Airlines flight attendant for 50 years. And we would have babysitters, and we would stay, we'd stay the night at these, really lovely old, I remember there's one old woman whose husband had a room that we were not supposed to go in. And I don't know why we weren't supposed to go in there, but of course I went in there, and he was sitting there watching WrestleMania 3. And he says, "Come in, sit down with me, and just don't tell my wife." And so we watched it. And I just remember oh my God, look how big he is. Look, and Hogan, and I was 4. I was just like, what is this? It's like a superhero that is like walking, and in Andre's case, not so well, but it brought me in. And so that was 4. So obviously I wasn't watching it religiously until I got to about 92, 93. And that was probably the worst era in WWF anyways, with the new generation era, but I was a kid. And so
2020 says hold my beer.
Yeah, 2020. Yeah, there's not a lot going on right now. But I loved 1, 2, 3 Kid, Razor Ramon, the Money in the Bag match. Sean Waltman hit his head off the top rope. I remember that. I have it on a VHS. It was on like a the best of Monday Night Raw, and I watched that match probably 100 times. Doink the Clown, how many people cringe when they hear that name, but I loved him when I was little. He scared me legitimately with that, when he was an evil Doink Clown, when he came out with that theme. I mean, I used to get goosebumps, on Yokozuna. That's when I watched every day. I never missed a show. I would try to watch the Monday show if I was up late enough, or I would watch Saturday morning WWF Mania with Todd Pettengill and Sonny. And of course, with Sonny, holy cow, and that caught my attention immediately, being going through puberty at the time. But it was something I always loved. And then I had a couple of years where I didn't watch, and then The Rock was huge, and he became my guy. I was a huge Rock fan. I used to always do the people's eyebrow. I would go up to people. We would always pretend to like fight in the hallways, and so it was something.
Your friends were really into it at the time too.
Oh yeah, all of we all were. I mean, I remember, going back to elementary school, we had a hill in the outside of the school, so it was like this grass hill, so you can fall onto it kind of gracefully, not hurt yourself. We would put each other in like the razor's edge, and we would land on like just on the side of the hill, and they're like, "Oh, do it again, let's go." We were living it. We were just obsessed at the time. So now that I'm an adult, going back to these memories, they're fond memories, and just watching as much as we could, going into our friends' basements, watching the pay-per-views. I used to watch when, on pay-per-view they had the fire. Like, it was just like the scrambled screen.
Yeah.
You can hear the audio. You can hear what's happening, but you can't see what's happening. So pay-per-view nights, I'd be sitting there listening to what was happening, and then I would wait till Monday to find out what it looked like,
Wow.
And I'd go to websites like Raja, Raja.com. It's like a news and rumors website. I used to go to that site. It was like on my rotation of like 5 websites I would go to every day in the 90s. And now to be running a website, it's just so, I guess it just all came to be,
So what has been your favorite interview or the favorite story that you've published so far?
Well, that's a good question. Favorites. My favorite interview was with Chris Candido's brother, Johnny. He reached out to me. I think I had shared either a photo of his brother or an article about his brother. And he wrote me and says, there's so much more that you don't know, and it would blow your mind, and let's talk. And so I said, sure. And he says, what's your number? And I said, well, I'm in the UK, but I have a Skype. So he called me on Skype literally 5 minutes after I got this message, and 4 hours we were on the phone. And I said to him, can I record this? And he said, yeah. So I had no notes. He was doing most of the talking. I was doing a lot of listening, and it was really for him just to kind of unload. Obviously he went through a lot with Tammy Sitch and his brother and everything else. And so for me, that was probably, and that was 2016, 1 year into me doing the site. That was really fascinating, and it meant a lot. The stories that we came out of, we had a 3-part interview series with him that went out, and still people read it and say that's one of the best things that you've got on the site. And I'm very proud of that one. took a while to transcribe 4 hours of audio. That's the most ugly part of doing what we do is transcribing, but
I believe it.
it needs to be done. I've Del Wilkes. He surprised me. He was my first interview, the Patriot, and just his story of drug addiction and how he overcame it. And he was up to 125 pills a day, and he was pouring his heart out to me. Just someone with the website, and just when you talk to these guys, you talk to them as humans. You just talk to them, and you just want to listen, let them talk, and just when they open up to me, it means a lot. Like Lanny Poffo, I used to do the Genius Cast podcast with him.
That's one guy all three of us have in common. I worked a show with him in Northern California a couple of years ago, wrestling for charity, and of course Evan has his connections with Lanny. So that's one guy we all three of us have in common.
Lanny's a fantastic guy. Like I was out to New York in 2018 for the 350 Days premiere in July, and I still had about 2 weeks left in the school year. And I had quit. I handed in my notice. I was an assistant principal that year, and it got to the point where I was working, 6 in the morning till 6:30 or 7 o'clock at night, and the website started to go. I had this uncertainty of whether or not the website was going to do well if I left teaching, but I took the risk. And Evan had given me the opportunity to fly out and go to the premiere. And when I was there, I was sitting on Evan's couch with Greg Valentine, who's in his boxers drinking tea, and it's mind blowing. And then Lanny, we met up and we went to a cafe, and we walked through, a park, and we ended up outside of a church. We were just like, we better behave. We're outside of a church. We saw, it's Scientology. Oh, never mind. We're all just having a laugh the whole time, and it was great. And so that led to us keeping in touch afterwards. We became friends, and then I proposed doing the podcast, and we had a 20 episode run, which was for me, it was just a privilege to be involved with that, hearing his stories. And again, with what you guys are doing with your show, it wasn't always about wrestling. It wasn't talking about his experiences or whatnot. It was what he enjoys: music, theater, things like this. And so we would incorporate this into the show, and people appreciate this because wrestling shows, wrestling podcasts, wrestling sites, and the same thing goes for any genre of sport or anything really. It is hard to kind of carve out your own, part of that niche, right? That makes you stand out. And so when you're doing something from the heart, I do feel people, and if you're listening as a listener, if they feel like they can, that they're a friend sitting on the couch with you, that's something they're going to tune in for. And that's what we try to do, and what you guys are doing. And it's we need people like this, it's because you could sit there and talk about, the review of Monday Night Raw or SmackDown or AEW. And, that's just one writer's opinion. For me, when I write stories and when my writers put stories out on the site, I try to, at the very most, try to keep it non-biased. So not in first person, talking third person, you were relaying a story. But of course, if they have exceptional access to the business like Evan, I say run with it. Tell us your stories. That's different. But for my writers and such, I don't want to go that path where we're just simply talking about what you see on TV and giving your opinion, because who cares what this random person's opinion is? It's really about how you felt when you watched it. You could throw in feelings like this because you can relate to that. But sharing the stories and diving in deep and getting all the different sources involved in the telling of the story, not just on the Jericho podcast, so-and-so said this, boom, 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 done. I've done that in the past when the website first started. That's because I was going off of what I knew, and I realized what the readers want and what anyone's want is to be able to dive in and just immerse yourself in the story. You have to have a hook. What's this about? Oh my goodness, Sputnik Monroe. How did he make a big difference in Memphis? Or you got a story about how we all know about the Montreal Screwjob, but did you know about in 1950s with Gorgeous George? and that's screw job. And so you throw these stories out there, make a way for people to relate to them, and then you teach them new things, and it's really great.
So what is the difference between a wrestling writer and a wrestling journalist? I hear a lot about microfiche and diving in and, a zillion results. But as somebody who was a writing major and English teacher, in different parts of my life, I was always taught, move people, make them cry, as opposed to just the bombardment of results and information. Right. So as the editor, as the person running this very special site, what's your take on all of that?
I don't want stories like recaps. I don't want stories about results. Those to me have no interest in my heart. Like, there are hundreds of websites that do it, and very few of those websites do a very good job of it. You know what I mean? But for those editors, I feel bad for them. You're talking the top echelon of wrestling news sites. They're probably constantly on their phones, regularly checking social media, checking their emails, looking for tips. Now we got to get this article out, and you got to have a good, catchy headline. What's going to make them read my news bit on this and not the other 100 stories running with it? I would hate that, because that takes the fun out of it, and it really just becomes just a job that you do. Whereas what we do, I don't have deadlines on the website, so if anybody's writing for me, I just say submit it when you can, when life allows it. Like, we're all busy, we've all got things going on. Most of, if not all of my writers have other jobs, and so this is obviously, they're not doing to get rich. I never went into this to get rich. It's just something we did for fun, and it's just an outlet, a creative outlet. But yeah, no, when you're talking about wrestling journalists, I think about somebody who can make you feel when you're reading history, something where the first paragraph has really drawn me in. Okay, so that's got me. It's like the back of a book. You're reading the blurb. Here's a story from the past. Why do I want to read this? If they caught me in the beginning, then you keep going, and then as you're reading, firstly, if the website doesn't look good, I'm probably gonna not read too far. So you have to have and it goes with anything. With a podcast, you have to have good quality. If you're doing anything, it has to. First impressions count. So right away, I'm tuning out if it doesn't look so nice. And I think a lot of people do this as well. It's just something that, it's just a natural reaction. But then you want to keep somebody's interest throughout. And so you're telling the story. You have a bit of a personality as you're telling it. It doesn't have to be black and white, and I'm reading that book, was it Sex, Lies, and Headlocks? Mike Mooneyham and Sean, I forgot the main author for it, but that's a book that came out about 15 years ago, maybe. And I'm interested throughout, because they're telling the history of these things that are happening. So these types are right. Mike Mooneyham, he's great. I'll forever read his stuff.
Mike Mooneyham is legitimate newspaper journalist who can write on anything, not just wrestling. This is what I'm talking about.
Right.
When somebody describes themselves as, quote, I'm a wrestling journalist, I'm immediately a wee bit cynical, and I'm like, I want to read a writer. I want to read a writer. To me, there's a difference, and which does not mean I don't respect, a Dave Meltzer. I think the guy, I was moved by his piece on Bruiser Brody when he died, etc., so on. But again, it goes back to move me, touch me. Just don't hit me with a bombardment of results, dates, facts. To me, that's not writing.
Yeah. You can intersperse it into your articles, and throw it in a catchy way. And while people are reading, they're learning little side bits as well. Someone like a Dave Meltzer, I mean, he's a special kind of person. What he does, I mean, reading his newsletter, it could be a bit onerous sometimes. He's so like long-winded with the way he explains and writes, just pages and pages and pages, and he makes you feel sometimes. But we need someone like a Dave Meltzer. I love his podcast. I'm a subscriber and I'll listen to what's going. That's the way I want to hear what's happening. If I want to know what's happening in the wrestling world news-wise, I'll listen to him. But with my website, we don't do news, we don't do rumors, we don't do any of that. So
Good. More
yeah.
power to you.
And I even say that on my Write For Us page. If you're looking to do recaps, blah blah blah, we're not the website for you. There's other websites that have, they do a good job of that already. Come right for my site if you want to tell history, and if you're passionate about that side of things, and throw me your ideas. And I'm constantly getting story suggestions that I never would have thought of. So it's like there are so many different cogs in this thing that we're doing, and just a lot of really fantastic people behind Pro Wrestling Stories. Incredibly grateful for that. But I would never, who deserves the right to call themselves a journalist? I guess is it years? Is it being able to move and, awards or what? I would never consider myself a journalist or anything of the sort. I'm an editor-in-chief. I'm an occasional writer, and I can spot good stories. And, through teaching as well, I could present those stories in a catchy way, but I'm not a journalist,
But you do more than that. You do more than that, and that's the next element that I wanted to talk about while we have time here, is that I wanted to talk about your musical career.
Sure.
And what you do as a musical performer, because I do think there is a related correlation between performing musically and performing in the ring. And I myself am not a musician by any stretch of the imagination, but my brother is.
Mm-hmm.
He'd be remiss if I didn't mention what a great musician he actually is. He really understands and feels it. And I'm the one who did the wrestling performing stuff as a manager. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a real correlation between getting in front of an audience in a wrestling sense and getting in front of an audience in a musical sense. Yeah. But we're trying to make them feel on the sense of comedy plus action, and you're trying to do it in a musical sort of way. And do you sort of feel there's that correlation between the two? The music and wrestling have that kind of...
The big one they have in common is you have to know your audience. When you're on stage, you need to already know what kind of reaction you're going to get before you do something. And it's having that kind of control where I'm going to do it, so it's going to work. Or if it doesn't work, being able to switch things up on the fly. Being able to think on your toes and be comfortable enough to do that. Same thing with performing. If the crowd's not feeling it, if you're going a bit too kind of mellow, all right, you kick it up for the next few songs, get them moving again. You mentioned musical career. That's a very nice way of saying I play music. I've been in a couple bands. I put out recordings and records and stuff, all independently. I've performed a few shows here and there, but it's a passion, just as much as writing is for me. So when I get to pick up my guitar, it's really great. I mean, just, with us all being home at the moment, we're all kind of able to go and kind of focus on things that maybe we haven't to. It's unfortunate why we're home right now with this pandemic happening, but I've been able to pick up my guitar more than I typically would, because you get too caught up in life when we're all moving 110 miles per hour. So being able to, I got the guitar over here just behind me.
You want to play something?
Yeah, go ahead, play. You want to?
Yeah, hit us with something.
What have you been working on?
I didn't put it here to play, but I put it here because it reminds me to play throughout the day. It's
a first. No, this will be a first for our show. We've not had anyone do any live musical performing for us.
There we go. Oh, geez, I don't even know if it's tuned, to be honest with you. My daughter was playing with it earlier. Okay. Oh, it sounds perfect.
There you go. There you go.
It sounds good on our end, so go ahead, play. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but...
Well, that's all right. When you got a guitar sitting in the background, you're almost asking for it. Yeah. What am I going to play? I'll do a song I wrote.
Perfect.
Sure. Why not? Get in Getting older in this life now, life is passing by before me. I think it's gonna be okay. Feeling changes in my mind now, I feel so introspected. I feel alright, 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 alright. This gravity won't keep me down. I'm flowing through this space now, but I feel it's gonna be just fine. Travel the world, seen some places, man, my pocketbook is hurting, but I feel alright, 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 and it won't keep me down. Said it won't keep me down. Said it won't keep me down. No, it won't keep me down. Getting older in this life now, life is passing by before me, but I think it's gonna be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
That was excellent. That was excellent. That's an added bonus on the wrestling and everything coast to
I have a
coast
bit
to
of
coast
liquid
show.
courage to help me get through that one.
Yeah, no, that was that. So, did you write that up during this whole COVID?
No, that one is, I probably wrote that back in early 2000s, but when just a couple years back, I was at a party and there was a left-handed guitar there, and we're sitting around a fireplace. It was a bit nippy outside, and the drinks were flowing, and I couldn't play, which is a shame because I'm writing. But this guy next to me, he's like, "I play left-handed," obviously, it was his guitar. So he was playing all of the songs I love, from Zeppelin, Beatles, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Oasis, and we bonded immediately. And I just sat there singing, and he's like, "Let's do something sometime." And so the two of us were just going to go in with our acoustics, record 5-track EP, what have you. And he brought in a couple friends. So I had who's now my good friend Andy. He did drums, and another friend Jake, who was doing bass. And so we went into the rehearsal space, and within 2-3 hours, we had 6, 7, 8 songs banged out. Just old songs that I had written from high school and all the way on up, from Heartbreak to getting drunk and what have you. Just silly songs of mine. And that was a song that started off a bit more mellow than that, but when I got with them, we kind of palm muted it, change it up a bit. And, they all just take on a different journey once you get others involved.
I want to get to the heart of just who JP Zarka is. If you had the opportunity to squeak by as a full-time musician, like some of my friends do, pay the bills but barely, or make a small fortune as a wrestling journalist, wrestling writer, editor, whatever the case may be, what would be your preference?
Oh, man. Well, with the website, I'm already kind of doing that with the website. I want to. Another passion of mine is music. If I could scrape by and play live and write music, have that camaraderie with the band and such, Hell yeah, I would do that. The website, I would just have it automated where I would just let old articles drop each day. And I would say, all right, see you later, pro wrestling stores. I'm hitting the road.
There you go. There you
Yeah, I
go.
would definitely do that.
Yeah, nothing like being on a stage. Yeah.
You know, because wrestling, I love wrestling, but it's not, you know what I mean? It's something that I happen to have just kind of fallen into this niche within a niche, right? Of
Right.
fandom, talking about nostalgic stories and sticking to that. And it works. And it's really kind of gone well for me. And I'm very, I say like, I don't like to use the word luck, you know, because there's been a lot of hours that's gone into this. My wife has been angry with me more than, you know, I would like to admit, just sitting at the laptop when I should be sitting over there with her in the other room or whatever. And a lot of time goes into making a successful website, you know, but you know, it's not something that I do because I'm just like obsessed with it, you know, and I do it because I enjoy doing it. And if it stops being fun, I can step away, you know, and but then again, I have to give it to the 44 writers that write for my site. You know, they've come on board because they believe in it, and I believe in this thing that I'm doing. And just because it, like, if I read the stories and I'm interested, I'm thinking others are going to be too, and others have reached out to me to be a part of this thing, and that to me that's special. You know, I keep saying like I would step away, but like I would then miss doing
Sure.
website.
Yeah. Do what you love. Do what you love, and money comes later. I have a love-hate relationship with wrestling, which I say pretty much every week. You mentioned Chris Candido. I'll tell you a quick little story. I'm sitting in a New Jersey indie. Chris Candido, Tammy, Sabu. That night, they were kids. I'm talking 25, 30 years ago, whatever it was. I lose track of time. And fresh-faced, you know, and excited to. They were like opening match, okay? Chris Candido and Sabu, absolutely unknown. And I'm talking to them, and you know, and they love wrestling and stars in their eyes. And a lot of it did not turn out well. Did not turn out well, you know? And I understand both sides of the business. And, you know, so I'm older and a little more cynical than you guys because I've
You've been through a lot, though. I mean, someone like Candido, firstly, he ate and breathed and slept wrestling.
Oh yeah,
passion. He was in love with it, and
a nice guy.
And a nice guy. You know, from anyone who, I mean, the way his brother talked about him, I mean, his brother idolizes him. You know, so when you hear obviously the other side of being a wrestler is you get a lot of pain, and you're going to start taking pain meds because you're on the go, and all you know, then you go in that direction, and then all of a sudden you could go into other different directions, and he was just unfortunately it wasn't, and then a relationship with Tammy, you know, that was fiery. That's an interesting one. But anyway, but like with you, having been involved with wrestling for many, many years, going back to your old radio station and the people that you met like in the 90s, Sherry Martel, Eddie Guerrero, you know, you having Eddie Guerrero cry on the phone with you at what hour? 2, 3 in the morning?
Yeah.
I mean, you've got all these people that not only did you meet through what you do, you became friends with them. And you lost a lot of friends too. And
it's an endless trail of young, good-looking corpses, as the expression goes.
Even I have that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Even I have that, unfortunately, in common with you guys, having lost a number of my friends here in California. You know, to this business, it's true. It takes its toll. I also wanted to ask you. If there was someone that you could interview or get a pro wrestling story from the past, who would you want to get that story from?
Number one, Bret Hart. I'm a huge Bret Hart fan. Look, he's when you read his stuff and you hear him in interviews, he comes off a bit bitter. He comes off a bit angry. He was obviously screwed over, you know.
And they dropped his brother to his death.
They dropped his. Firstly,
he kept the show going.
His brother died for the business. His whole life has changed for the business. Kicked in the head by Goldberg. You know, he's got a right. I mean, everyone. You know, I don't know how I'd be. I like to try to keep positive, but if I had all these things happen to me, I would come off a bit cynical too, and I wouldn't have time for people who are just talking nonsense. But anyway, like if I would love to interview him, and of course The Rock, Dwayne Johnson.
Is there someone from the distant past though that you wanted to get a story from that you've not been able to get a story about, but you want to get a story about?
It's a good question. See, like I love how like, but the distant past for me is Bret Hart, because I was a kid. And he was big. But if we go even before then, Macho Man, Randy Savage. I wish I would have had a chance to talk to him.
But you talked to Lanny for a long time.
Talking to Lanny brought his brother back in many ways, but it's not like sitting there having a conversation with Randy, getting to know him as a person. I mean, if you think about pro wrestling, Randy's got to be on everyone's at least top 10. When you're talking about personalities and what he's done for the business. So if we're going to go down that route of who we could talk to, who we can anymore, definitely Randy, 100%.
And then I'm also curious to know what your thoughts are on Dark Side of the Ring, because that sort of covers your territory, but not as, as voluminous. But they, do, a lot of the pro wrestling stories that you...
They do, like, for me, I've always had this vision for my website is to not only have the stories in audio or in written form, but in audio. So we've got the podcast happening now, which I'll talk about in a second. But I also I had this vision of like having some really good people who know what they're doing with the camera and presenting these stories in a visual way with interviews and this and that. And when I saw their first episode from season 1, which was on Macho Man and Liz, I was hooked. I mean, these guys are doing a phenomenal job. But I mean, kudos to them. I think they're really great. And it's interesting. Like the first season, I think of the episodes, we had all of those stories, but maybe 2 on the website already. And this season, I'm pretty sure Herb Abrams is the only one we don't have a story on. So it shows. Look how many people are watching that documentary.
I met Herb Abrams. I was backstage for UWF. I could give you some info on that.
I want to hear that. That sounds really cool. But like, how many people are talking about the Dark Side of the Ring right now? It's really great, and it's sharing stories, lesser known stories, and people are getting caught up into it and feeling those emotions. Like the Dino Bravo episode, I was in tears at the end of it, the way his daughter was talking. And, I hope that's the feeling people get when they're reading the stories on the site too. So they have done a phenomenal job visually and in that medium, and kudos and bravo to them.
JP, what do you think when people say they'll watch an episode of, let's say, Dark Side of the Ring or a wrestling documentary and go, oh, I knew most of that from all of my shoot interviews because they've watched 10,000 of them obsessively. I mean, that's not a way to judge art as far as I'm concerned.
No. If you're going to make a judgment off of if you knew the content beforehand is what you're saying?
Yeah, a lot of people criticize Dark Side of the Ring for that reason. And I think they do a great job for 42 minutes.
It's silly. I mean, I knew most of the stories, not as in detail as they put it out there. There's always something to be learned. Obviously, if you are a wrestling historian, you're going to know most of these stories. And so for you to make a comment that it's not good because you know all this, the 99.9% of the viewing audience don't know those details. And the job they're doing is great. So you got to look at it the way it's being presented. And that should be where your not criticism, but your critique should come from.
It's presented for a mass audience. The average person will go, oh, I remember the Road Warriors. I didn't know one of those guys died. Not everybody's a hardcore wrestling fan.
Yeah. And it's really opened up a lot of people to the business and the craziness. Like when I just reading Bret Hart's book, it was the first of so many books that I've read now in wrestling. I mean, I think I'm over 100 now, but you kind of have to be with what I'm doing. But that world is so interesting. And for the non-fan to dive in and learn, this is the reality of what these people are going through. And Evan, that's with what you did with 350 Days and everyone involved with that, the documentary, it was showing the realities of the business and what the life really is. They're not just these superheroes on TV. They're living, breathing people like you and me, and they're living their lives. They're leaving their families, their children, their wives, and to go on the road 365 days a year, or 350 days a year in this case. And it's interesting, and you think about right now, what's that big one on Netflix is The Last Dance, about the Chicago Bulls.
I just watched episode 8 last night.
So good.
I'm from Chicago. You're right on target with that.
Yeah, I'm from Chicago. I grew up with the Bulls. Like, how old was I when they first won I was 8, and then their last championship.
Making me feel old.
Yeah, I'm showing my age now. I'm 37. So I was 8 when they won the first one, and then in 98, I was 15. So those are pretty. I mean, that's the nostalgic bubble right there, 8 to 16ish, And so watching that and bringing that back and seeing what it was like,
seeing that everybody had a mullet. Everybody had a mullet back then. You're like, did that many people really have mullets? I didn't recognize that at the time. But now I look back on the 90s and then I go, how could they have loved all those neon colors? Did I wear neon colors like that all the time and look that bad? But, you guys
had the neon colors and the mullets, and I had the blonde frosted tips, which is why I'm bald now. We were all trying to look like Backstreet Boys, and you all were trying to look like,
yeah, like we were from extras from Wham.
Yeah, that's right.
This has been an absolutely delightful hour. I mean, I can't believe that
It's already been an hour. My God.
Yeah, we've been talking for just about an hour. I want to make sure that you get everything that you plugged in, that you want to let people know about you, so that they know to check out the things that you're working on.
So we just launched the Pro Wrestling Stories podcast, and you can find it on any podcast platform. We're on YouTube. Corey Rivard and Chris Toplack, two amazingly entertaining and talented people. They take stories from the website and then they talk about it for an hour. So they bring in a lot more than what's in the article itself. So they'll have a couple bits from the articles on the site, and then they'll run with it. Like one of the episodes was, The Rock versus Hogan at WrestleMania 18. And, they crack open a beer and they watch it and they're commentating over it and they're talking about it. So, but they're also talking about, the build up and what was going on backstage and how things didn't go to plan. And, so if you like pro wrestling stories and you like reading and diving into the history of it, definitely check out Pro Wrestling Stories, the podcast. You'll love it. PWStees.com, which are designs that have been created by the wonderfully talented Chris Faison. He takes stories and memorable parts of the articles on my site, and he puts them into a design, like a graphic tee. So we've got the plane ride from hell. We've got Gorilla Monsoon Bobby Heenan as a gorilla and a weasel. Phenomenal. We've got Andre the Giant with the Mr. Peanut body, but the Andre the Giant head. Things like it's really cool designs that they're great. So check those out. And if you are listening to this, if you go to pwstees.com, get 10% off. Use the promo code podcast. Simple as.
Excellent.
Get that extra 10% off. And, prowrestlingstories.com. I'm hoping to, at some point, doing the podcast was a pipe dream of mine in the beginning. Like, I always knew at some point I want to go audio, video, perhaps down the line. Books, that's something I'm looking to get into as well. There's certainly over 600 stories that you can compile into a book, and hopefully maybe get other wrestlers reaching out and want to share their story. Like Lanny, he writes for Pro Wrestling Stories. He'll call me.
Looking for input on what the California indie scene was like in the 2000s. I've got stories to tell myself. But
sure,
this podcast is for your stories. But maybe if you need the extra space to use up, I'm.
How to get in touch, my friend. No, I would love to do that. Yeah. it's all about just putting things out there that you hope people are, grasping onto. It's striking a chord nostalgically and, something that they're passionate about. And they read it and they smile and they're learning something. That's what it's all about. And that's what I hope I'm doing with the site. And gosh, turned 5 today. And, there's been millions of readers and something's going right. And I'm thankful for that.
Considering we're only on our 9th show, I appreciate the fact that you've been able to hold something together for 5 years. That's very impressive. It's longer than a lot of feds last. So
I can't believe 5 years has gone by like that. I mean, when I first started the website, I go back to some of the articles from 2015. I'm embarrassed, because they rotate out on the social media and just the quality you've
evolved.
It's evolved big time. I started off as kind of like this clunky, awkward, here's a story, to now it's just it's writing. It's presenting these stories to you, and you're going on this journey with these writers. Phenomenal. And so having someone like Evan on the site, it just really it makes my website go up here in a lot of people.
And JP, I just want to thank you and Javier, because you wrote really nice pieces this past week on the wrestler movie and on myself and my career in wrestling. And, I really appreciate it. And it meant a lot to me that you guys would put that much time and effort into it. So I want to thank Javier as well. And tell us a little about Javier.
He reached out to me after Silver King passed away.
Wow.
He wrote a message, and Javier's been a reader on the site for many years, and he would pop into the comments on the posts, and he says, a website like yours needs to do a story on Silver King. What happened to his death in the ring? For those who don't know, I'm sure there can be people I'm sure the wrestling fans know who Silver King is. Oh, yeah. He died in the ring. And he wanted me to present this story and put it out there and have questions asked. Why did this happen? How was he able to die in the ring? Why wasn't there help? And I said to him, you are incredibly passionate by the way you're questioning this, and you bring this up to me. He's a big, big wrestling fan of Mexican wrestling, luchadors, everything like this. And I said to him, why don't you, do you have writing in your past? And he says, I actually have done a bit of sports writing in the past. And I said, well, you know what? I would be honored for you to tell this story. And he did, and he sent it back to me, and I was floored. It was really good. It was tasteful. It asked the right questions. Reading a piece, you also want to bring up questions that need to be addressed in a situation like this. And he handled it brilliantly. Now he's got over 40 stories on my site, I think. Or almost 40 articles. So for him to have just reached out just to say, run the story, and I turned it and said, look, this is something you know a lot about, and you feel the passion about it, and run with it. And he's become one of my greatest writers. There you go. He's phenomenal. And he reached out to me about writing your story, Evan. That didn't come from me. That came from him. He appreciates the work you do, and he sees the things that we see, where these are stories. Maybe they're not, the Stone Cold Steve Austin headlines, but these are headlines that need to be out there alongside those stories too. It's important that the people who put their heart into this business, the unsung heroes, as you say, and Evan, you're one of them.
Thank you.
And just to tell your story it's an honor.
I really appreciate that. And that's what Buddy and I are trying to do with this show. Put people on every week that have sacrificed an awful lot and contributed an awful lot to wrestling, and can carry an hour. Not everybody could carry an hour on a radio.
You carry 2 hours, but
you carry 71 minutes. I don't know where the time.
we want to wrap things up, but I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'd love an encore. Can you play one more song for us?
Oh my goodness. Okay.
We can go out on a song here. That's something we don't normally do.
Okay. Oh. See, I haven't been playing. I haven't played. The guitar's over here because my daughter pulled it over earlier, so I have to blame her for this. Oh boy. Let's see what we're gonna do here. Okay, I'll do a song. I might mess up the words. I don't think you guys will notice, but this is more of a ballady song. You got to edit that. looking outside my window, thinking about times we shared, and I know it's gonna take a long, long time before we meet again, before I see your eyes light up my life. Packed yourself up to go when you told me that you did not know you'd be back again. It's not easy to pretend I'm fine. I'll continue to try, and it's all okay. I wouldn't change anything if I could. You've gone away. Think about it all another day. Pack yourself up to go. You told me that you did not know you'd be back again. It's not easy to pretend you're fine. Continue to try, and it's all okay. I wouldn't change anything if I could. You've gone away. You're on a train to find yourself a brighter day. Beyond your way. I think about it all another day. Cut off a bit, just shorten up.
That was fabulous. Thank you so much. We would love to have you as a guest again on our show. This was great. Really appreciate your time today, and we'll see you. We'll see your audience next week. But thank you so much, JP, for coming on our show.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you both. You guys are doing a great thing here, and it's been a pleasure to be a part of this.
5th anniversary of Pro Wrestling Stories. JP Zarka, intimate conversation and performance. This was totally improv, folks. Thank you.
Really loved it. Really loved it. Yeah, there you go, folks. ProWrestlingStories.com. Go and check it out.
Represent. There you go.
All right. See you next week, folks. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.